You're an agribusiness executive navigating an increasingly competitive market while trying to grow your company. Mergers and acquisitions are pitched as an accelerant to growth, but many M&A deals destroy more value than they create. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches for successful mergers and acquisitions. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I am your host, Joe Mosier, and as always, thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. Today, we've got an awesome interview. I'm going to be talking to Chris Fischer. Now, for those of you that don't know Chris, super interesting guy, actually a licensed psychologist, a PhD, Dr. Fischer, with many, many years of deeply studying and understanding human behavior, and then spending 10 years, more than 10 years actually, as the director of organization development at Land O'Lakes. And so just a very interesting blend of deep subject matter expertise, very skilled practitioner in his trade, and yet has spent a lot of time working with executives and leadership teams and management and employees all across the ag value chain. So a real benefit to our industry and someone I'm very, very excited to have on the show today. Chris is currently the principal at Fusion Consultants International, which does a lot of the same work, executive coaching, team enablement, high-performing team development, individual development, et cetera, really hyper-focused on the ag value chain and ag co-ops specifically. So again, just great expertise. And what I think you're going to find very interesting about today's episode is how Chris can help tease out some of the things that we maybe take for granted. And I think partially we take it for granted, or maybe it's avoidance, because when it comes to organization development, when it comes to building strong teams, when it comes to creating culture, it's the soft skills, it's the messy stuff, it's the human condition. But the soft stuff is also the hard stuff. These are things you have to get right. And so you're going to hear Chris talk about the real value and utility of using the right terms, and how as a leader identifying, are you leading a team or are you leading a work group? What does that mean for them? What does that mean for you? What does that mean for what you're trying to accomplish? And how does that clarity around what is this collection of people, how that can actually drive different and better results? You're going to hear him talk about how you can spot and identify whether you have a healthy team, a high-performing team, a strong team, or what are the telltale signs or the red flags suggesting you've got some issues that are going to have to be addressed, and kind of proactively addressing these before they become major issues. You're going to hear him talk about also how to manage transitions. So we all have this desire of achieving and developing and managing high-performing teams, but teams aren't static. We all know that, labor turns over, people retire, people get promoted, people choose to do different things, mergers happen, et cetera. And so managing these high-performing teams through transitions, through turbulence, through pain, through big wins, and through just large strategic initiatives, how important that is. And so really excited to have Chris on the show, and let's get over to the interview. Chris, awesome to see you today. I'm glad we could finally make this happen. Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this as well. We've been talking about this for many months, kicking it around, trying to make it happen. We finally nailed this down. So thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, we are here. We are here. And I am particularly excited to have, someone who's both a seasoned professional and a practitioner on the show, who has that deep expertise that you have that we're going to talk about here in just a moment, but also has those experiences wrapped in agriculture, agribusiness, co-ops, et cetera. Because sometimes I often want to have technical experts in given areas join the show, but it's always more meaningful and impactful and relevant when their stories and their experiences are wrapped in ag. And so this is just a great opportunity to have somebody with your pedigree and individual and team performance and leadership development and organization development, to have you spend some time with us today and provide a little bit of a different perspective, a pragmatic, easily applied perspective to something that can be very complicated but very high impact. And One of the things that's interesting, and full disclosure, I studied organization development in my advanced studies. Don't know that I've ever actually used it, though I kind of use it a little bit every single day. But what I think is really interesting about organization development, or OD, in case we talk about that a lot today, is it's seen as, soft content, right? It's the culture, and it's the cadence, and it's the way work gets done, and it's how we engage people. And what's interesting is it might be soft content. Maybe that's true, but it deals with hard problems. And so again, just to have an experienced OD practitioner like yourself on the show to help listeners think about how to improve their business's execution chops through the lens of people and teams and talent is exciting. And so thanks again for joining. And, beyond my preamble here, I think what would probably be of most value is to just have you kind of talk our listeners through an overview of your career in OD and in ag, and kind of level set on where you've been and what you've done and how that informs how you see the world.
Absolutely. It's no wonder we get along. I didn't know the OD background, so that makes sense now that you and I have this connection and speak a similar language. So that's great. I did not
don't
know that.
usually
awesome.
disclose that in here.
You're brave to do it here today. Thank you. I appreciate that. So my background, I'll start with the agriculture side, I guess. I've been in the ag sector industry since 2013. And it was a total surprise to me to get into agriculture, much less cooperatives, because I'm a psychologist. So I am a licensed psychologist, state of Minnesota, and take psychology, which is the science of human behavior, essentially, and apply it to the work world. And so really since 2013, I've been really working closely with, like I said, agriculture, the ag industry, cooperatives, and just taking that science, like you said, kind of the quotey fingers. No one can see me, but I'm putting on my quotey fingers right now. The soft science of psychology, which it deals with really difficult things, and applying that to agribusiness. So a lot of what I do is just understanding, where is it that organizations want to go? What are their strategies? What are their goals, KPIs, objectives, all those kind of things? How does that intersect with the people side of that business? And that's where I can help out and figure out and navigate and do some problem with some of those difficult issues that kind of always tend to be around the people side of things. So how do we take that science of human behavior, which is a good science, and there's a lot of scientific theory around that, and apply that to help organizations get to where they want to go?
That's great. And you think about all the different variables you need to control in a business. Because the business is a sort of a living organism, and it's a variety of component parts, right? Your technology, your processes, your structures, your customers, your products, your distribution, your warehouses, et cetera. And we always say it comes down to people.
Right.
And if you can start to do things that control for the variable of people, not controlling people, but controlling for the variability, and be able to anticipate what they're likely to think, how they're likely to react, what might be their incentives, their concerns, their worries. I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, you hear the joke, gosh, business would be so much easier if we didn't have all these stupid customers and employees to manage. And that's kind of where I can try to come in and help out with that. And so, it's a very fun way of taking something that, like you said, I have a deep expertise in, and applying it in a place where, it didn't always look like there was this great connection. I came into Land O'Lakes, and I was, in 2013, I was kind of like the oddball out there. People would be like, well, the psychologist, what's he doing here? And I'd show up to co-op board meetings and be working with them with, a number of different issues, from development to how do we have to do the strategic planning to, how do we build insight for ourselves so we can be a better team, to executive teams, to, learning and development for managers. And it was, kind of a running joke. Oh, here, for the first couple of years, it was like, oh my gosh, we're going to bring a psychologist. And then it became, the doctor's here. That's great. Let's start talking. Let's see what we can figure out to, just getting deeper and deeper in understanding those organizations and what they're up against, and being able to find pragmatic ways to help them navigate that. Because that people side can be the trickiest sometimes. It can be the trickiest. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, something that we've talked about is you and I have thought about how can our businesses support one another? How can we provide different value to clients, et cetera? A lot of it a lot of the work that you've done has come down to teams, right? Team enablement, team performance, and so not just on the individual development side. So I think we should maybe go there, spend some time there today, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. And I think terms and definitions are important. So before we dive deep into what does it mean to drive team performance, what is a team, Chris?
What is a team? And we laugh because it's such a simple question. Like, we all know what teams are. And I was just recently, last Friday, in fact, working with a team. And then we're just kind of getting stuck. They didn't know where to go with things, and they weren't quite sure how to navigate this. And it was a meeting and a session where there was a lot of silence. And as a psychologist, I get real comfortable with silence. But I finally said, "Hey, guys, are you a team, or do you think you're a work group?" And there was more silence in the room. And it's a great question because teams are much different than work groups. And I think in our work world today, we use team interchangeably for everything. I go work out and I'm in a workout class and they go, "Hey, here we go, team." And we're really not a team, right? We just kind of use that word all over the place. So what is a team? And the best way I have found to help people grasp the difference between actual teams and work groups is think about, maybe your sports days when you were little or however old you were. And there's basketball teams, and then there's kind of track teams or golf teams are the two examples that I use. And so basketball teams, that is actually a team, whereas a track team or a golf team is actually more of a work group. And what I mean by that is on a basketball team, you have 5 individuals on the court at the same time with one objective: getting the ball into the hoop and stopping the other team from getting their ball in the hoop. And we have shared objectives, we have shared accountabilities, and we have different roles and responsibilities while on the court at the same time, having to work together and interact and feed each other the ball and know when to play defense so all that kind of in real-time motion and movement with each other to hit our objectives. So shared accountability, shared goals, shared objectives. That's a team. Now, a golf team or a track team is a little bit different. We all have our expertise. You have your sprinters on the track team. You have your long distance runners, your high jumpers, your all those kind of different things, which are really important and they play a key role, but they're not interacting with each other. It's really they're trying to get their best score, their best time, their best height, their best whatever. And then we're going to aggregate those scores together and then put it into the scoreboard at once. But they're really not in there interacting at all. They're just kind of working on their own things as individuals, and their stuff gets aggregated. And there isn't a right or wrong with those, but they're very, very different. And you think about, when you're at work, when there's times where you have, maybe some committees and you're kind of working on some things and you have a very specific thing that you have to go on, and you go and do that work. You bring it in, you show it to the team, they kind of aggregate it together. That's probably more of a work group. But then you have teams where you get together on a regular basis and you have a very specific goal in mind. So for example, we'll use, an executive team where they have, their goal is to run this business and to make sure that it's profitable, make sure that operations, all those kind of shared objectives. Now, while they have different roles and responsibilities, they interact on a daily basis or a very regular basis to make sure that they're making decisions together that make sense for the whole, that they are making decisions that feed up to that greater objective that we're trying to hit with. They hold each other accountable to things. They give each other really good, tough feedback in moment. They're having to shift as a whole group. It's a much different dynamic than, say, that committee where you're kind of going out there, doing your work, bringing it back to the group and going, "Here I go, I'm done." And so it sounds simple, but there's really big nuances that play a very big role in that definition to help us understand how do we need to interact, what does that mean for us, and how do we move forward with that in a more effective way.
Awesome. So let me just, as I'm listening here, let me feed back an example from our world in agribusiness M&A, and then you tell me if I'm tracking or not. So you've done a transaction, or you're close to closing a transaction where you're going to buy a competitor. And let's say it's an animal feed manufacturer, and they're buying another couple of mills, some additional customer accounts, some different geographies, et cetera. And let's look at the accounting and finance team within that business. I just said team, just by instinct. So the finance and accounting department, they have a ongoing set of responsibilities of managing the generating management reports, ensuring proper visibility to working capital requirements, making sure that AR and AP is being properly managed and optimized for, processing invoices, paying bills, all the different things that they have to do.
Right.
And that accounting department may be let's say, a team because they all contribute their piece to an ongoing set of goals. But then on the M&A integration side, you're going to have these integration efforts that are going to pull and cherry pick particular people out of those teams to work on bringing the businesses together. So you might pull a couple people out of the accounting department and say, you're in charge of making sure that we've migrated and merged the chart of accounts. You're going to be in charge of making sure that any Forex or foreign currency exposures we have are being properly consolidated, being properly reported, that we have the necessary hedges in place, and on and on and on.
Yep, exactly.
But that feels more like a work group on the integration side. So am I tracking there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there isn't a right or wrong with those, right? It's not like, you should always have a team or, you should always have a work group. It really depends on the goals that the organization or the leader or the group or team is trying to accomplish. So one of the things that, I talk about, like for that merger piece, where it might be more effective and more efficient to send people out to go do their research, go do their thing, go do their, like you said, currency, whatever it is that they have to go figure out, and then come back and feed that to the group to be able to have them work efficiently, effectively, and I just need this information, boom, let's go. There's other times, though, we need to be a closer knit finance team where, hey, I need to know what you're doing because it really impacts what Betty's doing over there with payroll, and that impacts this decision over here. And if we're not staying connected with this as an actual team to solve these problems in real time, something could get dropped or missed. And it's not just me doing my part, dropping off and saying, there you go. It is really about that interaction of the individuals that can accomplish more as that group together to be able to get that done. And again, one isn't right or wrong. Really, as leaders, it's thinking about what is it I'm trying to accomplish and how do I structure the team or the group in the most efficient and effective way. Now, what I found too is within co-ops, they're probably more used to doing the work groups at certain times, and they can kind of struggle with that team side. So that's when they do decide, hey, let's do a team. Sometimes a little struggle of like, well, now what do we do with that? How do we manage that team and make this work efficiently and effectively so that we can get things done and not just bump into each other and feel like we're not making decisions together or we're not really working as effectively as we could.
So as we think about this, interesting differentiation between the two. And you're right, we just default to team. As I said, I did earlier, you just default to using the word team.
Right.
It feels, at this moment, it feels like it's probably a more useful thought exercise for management as they think about how they're going to pull a group of people together, how they're going to talk about that group, how they're going to structure the objectives. It feels like it's probably more valuable, again, for the leadership than it is for the actual participants, whether they call themselves a team or a work group. Is that true, or are there other benefits to the people actually in those different types of groups of considering themselves a team or a work group?
Yeah. I think one of the things you hit on is like, as a leader, it's really beneficial for that leader to define what is the purpose of this. I was just working with a leader this morning, in fact, and he was struggling to decide if it should be his group of people that works underneath him should be a team or should be a group. And one of the issues that he was bumping into is he had not clearly defined the purpose of that team. So he had some people that were working in one part of the business that was very separate from this other part of the business. And they had different projects and they were kind of doing their own thing. He's like, I don't think they should ever be a team. I said, maybe, but let's hold that. You also have this goal, though, as an organization to create a platform where it isn't just the individual businesses doing their own thing, but there's a synergy between the businesses and there's ability to build a platform we can get more done to be able to better serve our customers, to bring more value to them. But he's like, but how do I help them become a team? Because, this feed department is totally different from the agronomy department. I just want them running separately. I said, well, maybe, but how can we have parts of this be a team so that you can better serve those customers who have both of those areas? Mm-hmm. And you have to have that purpose and that vision and those objectives clearly set so that the players know what they're aiming for. So they know what their goal is and they know how they need to interact to be able to hit that goal. But you got to have that goal first. So that's a really important piece of having a team, is shared objectives, shared goals that we can hold each other accountable to and work towards.
So thanks for that. Shared goals, shared objectives. Seems like it's table stakes. As we all think back over the course of our careers, how many times were we on a group and 3 weeks, 3 months, 6 months in, you realize, what are we actually supposed to be doing? Like, what does done look like? What's the value of done? And why do we start this in the first place? But that aside, if those are some of the prerequisites for a team or for a work group, but let's use team now, then what are the characteristics that you look for or the telltale signs that, okay, this is a strong, high-performing team? Because I think we've all got the sense of, you know it when you see it, right? It's a gut call. That's a strong team. But I'm guessing someone with your background probably has a sense of what is a strong team. Or maybe conversely also, what are the red flags that management needs to look out for, where it's maybe indicative of a festering issue that's going to eventually become a very big problem somewhere down the road?
Yeah, no, great question. So there's kind of three things I think about in healthy teams. One is clarity. Does the team have very good clarity around what that purpose, what that goal is? And do they buy into that? That's a really important piece. The next one, if we have that kind of taken care of and they are all understanding that piece, the next one is climate. And climate of the team, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but that's like, how does the team show up? What are our norms? How do we navigate problems? How do we navigate conflict? Those kind of things. What is that climate of the team? And what does it feel like when you walk into a room and they're all sitting there working together? And then the third piece is competence of that team, meaning, so we know where we're going. We have a good team. We can get along well. But if we have people on the team that are not competent in what they're supposed to be doing and their role and their responsibility, that's going to be a problem. Or they have great competence, but they're not empowered to go get done what they need to go get done because there's other things in the way. That's going to be a problem. So you really think about those three pieces: clarity, climate, and competence to be able to see if this is a healthy team or not. And then ultimately, if you have those three things, another critical piece of that is, are we working together as a team to get that team result? Meaning sometimes it's very easy for individuals on teams to look at their own individual goals and not constantly be looking at what's the team results? How is the team actually doing? And what is my part in that? And that's a really important piece to think about that. So characteristics of those good teams. And I can talk more about that climate because that seems to be the one that people get most interested in is, okay, we get the clarity piece, got it. But when you say climate, what does that mean? I really like Lencioni's work, if people have ever read the book, and it's an easy read, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And he lays out so wonderfully, if you want a good, strong team climate, do you have trust? Do you have good conflict? Do you get people who are committing to, what we're trying to get done? Do people hold each other accountable, and do we get the results? It's kind of those things that I talk about. So, what does that mean? Trust meaning, I could be vulnerable with you. You can be vulnerable back with me. We trust each other's intent. We're really out for that win-win. I know that you are of good character. And so, just that trust piece that we are in this together, like a good relationship, and we can have, really good conversations. Because without trust, it's hard to have good conflict, which is that next building block, meaning human beings, we're infallible, working with other infallible human beings. Can we fight? Can we disagree? Can we not get along at moments, but trust each other that we can make it through that disagreement, through that conflict on the other side, and still be working with each other? That's a really critical piece with that. And I love that, good relationships have that trust so that we can have a good conflict. And then once we've had that good conflict and we ultimately have to make a decision as a team to get moving forward, do we commit to that? So once that decision's made, we have to be able to go, okay, you and I disagreed, but the team is moving this way. So I have said my piece, and now I'm all in with this decision. I'm 100% committed to, I'm going to pull this. So it doesn't mean that I say yes in the meeting and then go outside the meeting and say something different. You really have to be committed to that decision as a team. And then that next piece is accountability. So if people start wandering off of that account or off that commitment, other team members, and it shouldn't always be the leader, other team members are going to hold that person accountable and go, well, hold on. You said you're going to go do this, and I'm not seeing you uphold your end of the bargain, or you see you swaying a little bit. And good teams have that ability to hold each other accountable, support each other to get things back on track in a very healthy fashion. Again, right? We trust each other, can have good conflict so we can hold each other accountable. And then that last piece is that team results, that, like I said before, that ability to put aside our individual results to be able to really focus on what's the team trying to accomplish. Did we, win the game? And it wasn't about me, doing all my stuff, it was as a team. We truly came together, and I'm focused on those team results, not just my own results. So I think that's a great way of kind of defining that climate side, which is kind of that more human aspect piece that can get a little sticky at times.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
I want to ask you about how should leaders and our listeners be thinking about how to create the conditions or build stronger teams, but we'll come back to that in a minute. In terms of assessing, you use the word healthy, and I use the word strong or high performing. I think it's all largely synonymous in the intent of what we're saying. Is it materially different when it comes to work groups?
Oh,
because
gosh.
I'm thinking about,
question.
Let's take the division lead of agronomy for a co-op may be dual hatting. We're going to run the agronomy business. We've got the seasonality. We've got sort of peak demand periods where we really have to execute because we get one shot on goal.
Yeah.
Right. And there's always reapplications, but you want to pretend those don't exist and you just do it right the first time. But then this individual may also be driving other strategic, initiatives within the company, agronomy related or not. Right. So typically folks in big roles do tend to double hat. And so it's very clear how this individual would assess if their team is healthy. Would they simply apply that same, clarity, climate, competence framework to the individuals they're engaging sort of episodically to drive strategy, drive change, integrate an acquisition, enter a joint venture, bring a new product to market, whatever that big thing might be? How does that differ or look the same?
No, that's a really good question because there's certainly some bleed over, right? You have to have trust and conflict at times. I think the difference between the team aspect of leading a strong team and the leading a good work group is as a team leader, you really want to empower your team to solve its own problems on the field versus a work group. You're probably going to have to manage those individuals more closely and give them that. You still have to have trust, still have to have good conflict, but it's between that leader and that employee versus employee to employee on that team. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. And it's not in ag, forgive me, but I played football at St. John's University, and John Gagliardi was the legendary coach up there. And he used to not call plays because he wanted to have his team, his offensive team, work together to be able to understand what's happening on the field, work with each other in real time to switch up and know how to call plays or shift plays with each other without him having to always call them in and say, here's what you need to do. That's the difference between having a really strong team is you trust them on the field to get done what they need to get done versus a work group. The leader has to kind of navigate and do that, more of that intervention, if you will, for the team players.
Interesting. Yeah. And so if you're leading the work group, you don't even let them audible on the field.
Right. Right.
You call the play that we send in, and if that's not going to work, you better call timeout.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. And you want, and think of the ability as a leader. That's how a leader knows things are really going well, right? We'll talk more about assessment, but really the ultimate assessment of a leader of a team is to be able to sit back and watch the players solve the problems on their own and navigate the issues on their own. It's not going to always be perfect. It's not going to always be clean, but you know that they are doing the things that they need to do to get to that objective. And you're just kind of watching and letting them get through that. That's when a leader goes, okay, now we're humming. This feels great.
Wonderful. So now I want to jump to, and I kind of was hinting at earlier, but the idea of building healthy teams, to use your terms. There's a couple of reasons I want to talk about this. One, I think this is where we have the most value for the people listening is to be able to walk away with that sort of bar napkin cheat sheet of here's the things that I really need to do. Here's the things I can walk away with today to start thinking about maybe doing differently, et cetera. But it's also important to talk about why do you want to build strong or healthy teams, which seems obvious. But when I think about it, it actually has a very tangible outcome, right? You're future-proofing your business. Yeah. And you're doing it in a way that it's not just about building this team that can do their jobs well. That's wonderful.
Yep.
But you want to ensure that you're fight ready to execute strategy and to manage growth. And also in the same turn, you're also de-risking the future to some degree. So it's not just, well, we're excellent at doing the job in front of us. Awesome. Are you going to be excellent at doing jobs we can't anticipate?
Yeah.
Responding to opportunities or risks that we don't envision. And so again, if you have any sort of tips or things that you would encourage the agribusiness leaders that are listening, say, here's the things that you need to do to start to create that clarity and that climate and that competence and that commitment, all those things, I think that'd be of high value today, Chris.
One of the things, and this is, I said I was coaching somebody today who's leaning into getting his team working better. It is really kind of my team on a page. And you think about it, one page sitting in a landscape, and at the top, it should be purpose of the team. And you should be able to get that down in a couple sentences, couple bullet points. What is the purpose of this team? And if you can have that clarified, great. Now we can go down to that next role or that next step and look at what are the roles and responsibilities to get that stuff done, and being able to very clearly say each person has a specific role, has a specific responsibility. There's not a ton of overlap. It's different enough where there's disparate differences, but similar enough where they can run into each other a little bit, and be able to have that very clear. Everyone understands and you understand, here's the roles and responsibilities. So purpose of the team, roles and responsibilities of the team. And then below that, if you could have the norms of the team, and norms being, it's kind of our expectations of each other, rules of engagement, those kind of things. Underneath that, then too, with a couple bullet points of, we only have hour and a half long meetings. We make sure people are on time. We have good conflict, and we can leave, whatever those rules of engagement might be, as we talked about earlier, to help that good climate. If you can do those kind of three things on a one-sheet piece of paper, you know that you're building a really good, strong team. Purpose, roles, responsibilities, norms, and expectations of each other. And everybody has that sheet of paper on the team, buys into that sheet of paper, understands their part in it, reviews it. For the first however long you need to review it, but then it's just kind of second nature. That's how you can really start to build that team. It brings so much clarity to folks and the ability to know that we're all pulling together at that point.
And I think as you're talking, I'm just envisioning how this works. And, I was going through my head of folks working in a seed cleaning plant, right? And how they might respond to that, or this aforementioned accounting department, right? Where they process invoices. And so it's even applicable, I think, in the relatively straightforward routine, high impact and very important, but relatively predictable type work environments. And I'm going to go maybe off in the tall weeds here. One of the things that we've been working on a lot with our clients for the past several months is trying to identify opportunities to repurpose existing work to advance other efforts in the business. And what came to mind as you were talking is if you'd done the work of documenting, here's the purpose of this team or this department or whatever it is. Here's our roles and responsibilities, even if they're conceptual in nature. Directionally correct, not surgically precise, but they help create the clarity. And then you talk about those general norms. Even if that norm is everyone's going to have a knife in their back, and we're cutthroat, we're going to undermine each other. That's how we get things done around here. I win at your expense, whatever they are. If you document those now flow into job postings when you're hiring. They flow into the orientation and onboarding materials. They flow into how you cross-train people across different departments when they come in. They get reinforced when you're, been assigned to be, some companies, every new hire has a sort of an experienced person that's tagged to them for the first couple of weeks to be their point of contact for questions. You don't just do these things episodically for this one application. If you do that work, and if it's actually good and resonates, there's probably a dozen different applications where you can reuse that elsewhere. And again, that repurposing is this kind of hidden efficiency, because how many times do we keep grinding on the same
Same
stupid
stuff
problem
every time.
And ultimately, you've kind of, if you do it once and if you just reused it, you'd get 80% of the value, no doubt.
And it's great because I was earlier this month working with some operation folks within a co-op, and these were the managers and supervisors of those operations. And we were talking about, how to build good teams, how to have good one-on-one conversations, et cetera, et cetera. And to your point, something like that, when that gets created, it's a living, breathing document. And so you are then able to, a new person comes in, you as the team leader don't necessarily have to go through the onboarding. The rest of the team is so strong and understands those norms and has that team knowledge in their head. They pick up and bring that person onboarding and then go, here's it is. Here's what our goal is. Here's what your role is going to be. And here's how we're going to behave today. And just kind of keeps reinforcing that. Boy, you got people who are really good at leading that. You know who your successors are going to be if you're that manager. You see who can work with the team and manage the rest of the players on that team to help get things out of them that they didn't think they could do. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, they have clear goals and they know what they're doing. They're able to behave in these ways that we have written down on this one sheet to really help me know who the ones are going to be the next leaders that they want to be. And you can pick up something like that and put it into different teams and be able to kind of, like you said, repurpose that over and over again. There's just so much power. And it allows us as leaders to then be able to release the always having to get in there and manage and be in the nitty gritty and the weeds. And it allows the team to manage themselves, which is so freeing. The team feels like they know that they can get done what they need to get done. They're trusted to be able to get done what they need to get done. They're empowered. And you as the leader get to watch them do it and maybe course correct a little bit here and there and let them run. And they'll come up with, more innovative ideas, better ways of doing things. And, it gives them the freedom to, once they know how they have to show up, it gives them the freedom to kind of do some things differently in the future, though, because we get the baseline. So there's a lot to that.
Fantastic. Another scenario here. Let's call it managing change as a general label, but because you just gave an example there of you've got this existing healthy team. They've kind of got their poop in a group. They've figured stuff out. And now there's a new person they need to onboard, right? So it's a variable, but it's additive in nature, right? You've introduced a new team member, but the whole system can kind of respond to that. What does this look like when you've got a high-performing, healthy team and suddenly the leader changes? Or and maybe it's not the leader, it's a leader. It's a senior, it's one of those influential people within the network that have been there for a long time. They've got they got some positional authority, they have high influence, and they leave. How do you manage that? Or, you take this high performing team and take it back to M&A. You have this high performing team and they're going to be part of the surviving entity. But they're suddenly going to be paired with a whole bunch of people from another legacy organization, and they all need to come together. So how should our listeners, and those are just a couple of examples, there's a lot of different strategic changes that could introduce major transitions like this. Can be retirements, right? How do you manage that as a leader? And try to help get your team through that period of turbulence?
Yeah, great question. So when I think about that change, I think about it in two ways. One is the team makeup, which you were describing, people coming in, people coming off, those kind of things. I'll talk about that. And then there's the changes in strategy, which I'll talk a little bit about that on the second part. So the first part with team dynamics, with personnel changes, leader comes in, new team members. It's really interesting. Anytime that somebody comes onto a team brand new or leaves a team and gets replaced, whatever that might be, you really start over as a whole new team, right? So people, if you go back to your Psych 101 days, if you remember, Tuckman was the psychologist's name. He came up with the wonderful phrase of forming, storming, norming, performing. It's a wonderful thing that people kind of keep remembering. Forming, storming, norming, performing. So anytime that there's a personnel change, you have a brand new team and you have to reform. And so that forming stage is really about courting each other, getting to know each other. It's reformulating the climate of the team. And when somebody new comes in, it's a whole new personality, it's a whole new way of doing things. You have to start over and go, okay, I guess we got to start over. Now, teams that have been together for a long time and one person comes in can kind of get through that forming stage pretty quickly. What's interesting is untrained teams will try to stay in forming for as long as they possibly can, right? They want to stay in that courting stage. And really good team leaders will almost push the issue and go, we got to get out of this forming and start leaning into storming, meaning we're going to have a fight here. We're going to have some disagreement. We're going to have some conflict because we're human and we're going to. And most of the time, what happens in that storming stage is we'll come out with norms that are unintended versus really intentional norms of how do we want to show up and really work with each other. So an unintended norm, meaning, hey, there's a conflict. There's one really strong personality. There's one maybe quieter personality. The new norm becomes whatever strong personality says, that's the way we're going to do it because they're the loudest, they're the strongest, they're the one that's going to push this. And the quieter person is just always going to defer. Well, that's now become a norm that may not be helpful in the future. Mm-hmm. What you want to do is have a good storm where we can get some healthy norms around, hey, everyone has a voice, or, we need to have conflict where people aren't screaming, all those kind of things. And then once you get through those norms and have some healthy norms, if you will, then the team can start performing. So it's always think about somebody leaves, somebody comes in. How do you as a team leader take your team through that forming, storming, norming, performing in a way that you can get to the intentional norms and high performance versus the unintentional norms and maybe less optimal performance?
Yeah, no, I have a question. So thankfully, in the world of M&A integration, you never find yourselves having to induce the storming. It just happens, right? It goes right beyond forming, right into storming. Mm-hmm. But how do you, maybe this is a bit esoteric, but how do you as a leader guide that storming to a productive outcome without forfeiting the chance for the team to kind of arrive there together? Because a big part of what I'm hearing you say is it's kind of that self-determination of the group. Right? They kind of collectively arrive at something that works well for them. Mm-hmm. And if you have your finger on the scale, does that impact, even if you see that the storming is going to generate some unhealthy norms? Yeah. I mean, how do you delicately help them through that without manipulating it or causing them to reject the organ?
Yeah. And that is the art and science of good leadership, of being able to know when to intervene, intercede, know when to put your fingerprints on it, and know when to let the team kind of move through that. I'm trying to think of a good example. Actually, one is coming to mind where there was a very high-profile M&A between two very healthy, strong cooperatives. And I was working with the two executive teams as they were coming together with that. And I worked closely with the CEO. And it was always this constant dance that I was coaching him through and coaching the team through of, when do I intercede? When do I have to really kind of talk to this one leader and get them to quiet down a little bit? When do I have to talk to this other leader and get them to show up a little bit differently? How do I give the whole team feedback in ways to go, this is not healthy. You guys are not showing up the way I want you to show up. And it is, that's where that leadership, what's the word I'm looking for? Good leadership hygiene, if you will, of being able to watch, observe, and work with your team to be able to help them navigate those pieces of, are they being vulnerable enough with each other? Is there enough trust being built up? Who am I watching that's being quiet? Who am I watching that's overtaking? And how do I dance with these folks to be able to get them in the place that they need to be? And that's not easy. It takes some time. There's some things you can do to formally assess teams and work with teams to understand what level they're at different parts of their team work, and be able to give leaders a little bit more precision and intentionality where they're going. But sometimes it's just, really good intuition and leadership hygiene of watching, observing, and knowing how to play with that.
Great, thanks. And you're also going to talk to us about managing the transitions from strategic changes. So please.
Yeah, and sometimes you can have teams. So that's the when you have personnel changes and people changes, and then there's the other side where you have, like the strategy's changing, or hey, we're going to go in a different direction, and that can really disrupt the team in the sense that they get along well, but now all of a sudden it's like you're moving their cheese. And so how do you navigate the team that way? And it's simply making sure that there's kind of 5 things in place for this too. Is are they aware of the changes that are happening? Do they get the strategy? Do they get the goals? The objectives have maybe changed. So we got to give more clarity. So let's give that clarity, right? And then we have to work on their motivation. How does that change fit with the team's goals, fit with their purpose, fit with who they see themselves, and really making those connections from strategic change to what drives them, motivates them, and builds their desires. And then you have to look at, do they have the skills and capabilities to be able to do things differently? And that could be, certain trainings or coaching or books or whatever it might be to help them build some new skills to be able to get done, whatever it is that they have to be doing differently. And then lastly, how do you hold them accountable to that and reinforce this? Because when people, especially teams too, when they have to go in a different strategic direction and they'll get going on it, but humans want to go back to homeostasis. And especially if there's a group of individuals are kind of working together and let's go back to this. They can kind of get this group mentality to go back. As a leader, you have to constantly reinforce, nope, this is the new direction. This is how this needs to be done. This is where we need to go do this. So it's really about making sure people are aware of the changes, making sure that they have the motivation for those changes, making sure that they have the skills and abilities and capabilities to make that happen. And then I'm constantly reinforcing them to stay on the track that I need them to go to.
Wonderful. Chris, this is great. And I could obviously, as the listeners can tell, I could probably keep asking you lots of different questions and scenarios. Strategy execution, and particularly around M&A integration, is just, it's messy and complex by nature. But then when you layer in the human element, it sometimes feels like an almost unsolvable problem, right? We get through it. We learn. We never get it done perfectly, but you get through it and get done. And I just think there's a lot here for folks to think about, reflect on, digest, and take away, saying, here's a couple of things that I could do that'll certainly going to not do any harm, and likely probably put us in a much better position. But time is, of course, a limited resource. And so I'd love to have you back at some point. But as we kind of bring to the close today, obviously you've many years at Land O'Lakes, leading organization development within the co-op, working with a lot of different boards and executive teams around driving strategy through people, and a lot of that work that you did. What are you doing now? Talk about your practice, what kind of work you're doing, who are your ideal clients, things like that.
No, thank you. Yeah, and maybe I'll lead into that by leaning into something you just said. So a lot of times leaders will say exactly that. We'll muddle through this. We'll get through it. And you will, right? But I think when organizations and leaders will give intentional focus and intentionality around navigating those hard people things, it can go exponentially quicker. So it's more efficient and exponentially more effective, because you're just going to have so much more output from your folks. You're not going to be sub-optimizing things. You're not going to be stepping on each other's toes. So I think that intentionality is really important. You could muddle through it, but boy, think about how much faster and more effective you'd be if you give it some intention. And so that's where I can come in. So a lot of what I'm working with in organizations now is, assessment pieces around this teamwork stuff. So I have a number of assessments that I can come in and say, all right, you have this new forming team. Where are they at within their climate, clarity, and competence? And we can actually use assessments to help understand where they're at and then help them move to new levels. So I'm doing a lot of that work right now, a lot of executive coaching. So I have, since I've left Land O'Lakes, I've brought up an old LLC of mine called Fusion Consultants International, and something I did from 2009 to 2013 before I joined Land O'Lakes. And it's a lot of taking that psychology and building it into the workplace. So assessments, executive coaching, team dynamics, organizational development, change management, and even doing some sales development. And I'm working with those sales groups to help build their skills as individual salespeople, and then working with their sales leaders to help find how can those sales teams actually act better as teams to support each other and work with each other and navigate those. So it's been fun. I've been doing this since it's almost been a year exactly since I've left Land O'Lakes and went back out on my own, and it's been a great time. And I'm very pleased to still be working within the ag sector, the ag industry, and co-ops in particular, where I find a great deal of joy of working with these people.
And so that remains your focus, is the ag value chain, particularly around agricultural co-ops.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. When I first started at Land O'Lakes, I knew very little about ag, and I knew even less about cooperatives. And yet here I am now, where I feel like I have a great deep expertise with that. I kind of understand that industry. I understand those people, and I think I can add a lot of value to them.
Well, I think if you do consulting work long enough, everyone thinks they're so different that you find out they're all kind of the same. And what makes them the same is how different they all think they are. But ag is different. But I do think that the co-op, not just from an organizational and ownership structure, but the shared yet sometimes competing objectives of ownership versus management and the business, how decisions get made, the unique nature of farming, and the limited opportunities you have to get it right, the number of variables you have to control for, the number of variables you cannot control for. I do think it's important that there are trusted advisors that have deep technical expertise that are hyper-focused on that area. So I thank you for the work you're doing for agriculture and the ag supply chain. It's really important.
My pleasure. It's great. It's been a great ride thus far. I'm excited to keep working.
Fantastic. Congrats on the year. Chris, how can folks that want to continue the conversation get in touch with you?
Yeah. So pretty simple stuff. We're building a website right now. We have a new website that we had launched, or we had launching the new website. We had an old one that we're kind of redoing. So it will be www.fusionconsultantsinternational.com. It's not completed yet, but we're getting that done. So that's one way you can contact me. The other simple way is just an email address of drcmfisher@gmail.com. So that's Dr. C.M. Fisher at gmail.com. Questions, thoughts, more than happy to respond back with anything that you might need.
And you're on LinkedIn as well, I assume.
And I'm on LinkedIn. Yes, thank you. Yep, LinkedIn. And yes, Dr. Chris Fischer on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. Well, Chris, thanks again for joining us and being part of the Pacesetter Pod today.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
Fantastic. And to our listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. A reminder to like and subscribe to the Pacesetter Pod, whether that's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And I encourage you to connect with me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn. And you can always set up a call directly by visiting Mosier Consulting Group online at mosiercg.com. Thank you as always for listening. We appreciate having you with us, and have a safe day.
This is the podcastfactory.com.